am Julie Byrd Diana in the Standard Business Department. I'm here today with Jamie Van Camp from SECURA. She is our underwriter. The childcare business industry is one that we're always going to need. Everybody has children and people need to go to work. So I'd like to talk to you specifically about SECURA's appetite for it. Do you have a specific target in this industry, such as a commercial daycare center, or maybe one that's in a church, or one that is actually an in-home daycare? Or what about drop-off care or mom's night out? Is that something that you would be able to consider?
Sure, that's a great question. So our market is very focused towards, the commercial daycares. At this point, we're not really into the in-home converted residence type establishments. If there's a church exposure where they are in the church, it just kind of depends based by base circumstances on, whether who's got access to where the children are, where do the children have access to. The mom's night out, currently right now, we're really much more on a 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. kind of, normal business hours piece of it. There's just some, different exposures that pop up when you start doing overnight things and evenings like that are late. So.
It's completely understandable. That is a common question we get is people who have in-home or can they drop kids off?
Yeah.
So thank you for clarifying. As far as pre-qualifications, we kind of just touched on a few of those, but do you have anything that really stands out in your mind when you see a submission come in? Is there, such like a staff to child ratio, or what if the daycare center has violations with the state? Is that something that is going to red flag it and knock it out, or could it be considered?
Sure. So the state licensing is a huge thing for us right now. It's one of our major requirements, and we'll ask for a copy of that state licensing just to make sure that everything is up to date and not expired. The inspections are also the next big key thing. We try to pull, as many of years of inspections as we can just to kind of see if there's like a history of, different things happening. But we usually specifically ask for the most recent one if we are not able to necessarily get that information for ourselves. But violations are pretty common when it comes to childcare. It's hard keeping track of everything and, staying on top of paperwork and, all the logs that everybody has to take care of all the time. So there's minor things that do pop up that are totally fine and we'll still consider it an account. It's when you start seeing things like child gets left alone or child repeated bitings or things of that sort. Those are the things that we start to get a little bit nervous. And I have been seeing a little bit too of, your staff ratios, just the economy that we're in. It's hard keeping, staffing levels up, but it really is important to have, those child caregivers to child ratios that are in flux, but nothing that I think, unless I would ever have a question, I would definitely ask for more information to clarify. If there's some bigger type of violation, I'd probably ask for more details. So usually more details makes things a lot more easier for us to consider.
That's great. And so that would be just kind of a case-by-case basis. If there were some violations, we just need to review it, and maybe
Correct.
we would approach the agent with a little more detail requested. So that's what I understand.
Yeah.
Great. What I know experience has been something that we always ask our agents because it is, for this particular segment, a big deal. What sort of experience are you looking for from someone who runs a childcare facility?
Yeah. So the ideal would be 3 years of experience, loss history, all of that to go along just to see that they're established. But there's definitely, a need for more childcare. So there's a lot of people jumping on that boat. A lot of the times I like to just get a resume so you see kind of have they been working in a daycare setting before? How many years have they been working? Are they, did they go to school for, child education and stuff like that? As long as, there's transferable skills there again, it's something we can look at and take into account of looking at the whole account.
That's great. So a resume would be something that would be very helpful with a submission from an agent?
Yeah.
If it's new? Great.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get questions on some child care centers will take kids on field trips, like maybe to the zoo or walk across the street to the park or a museum. How do you feel about field trips or another question that's very common is if there's a pool and or a playground near the child care center or
Mhm.
included with the child care center, what sort of limitations would there be for those sorts of exposures?
Sure. So field trips, I mean, you got to keep kids entertained. They're 5-second attention span. So, you know, being able to walk across the road to the park is something that's super helpful. So, I mean, anything that's, not super high risk, you're walking to the parks or you're going to the local pool or something of that sort. And there probably is going to be more questions that are asked, just kind of, are they going across busy streets? Who's doing the transportation? Is it a daycare van that's taking them? Do they have a charter bus that does these field trips? And how are you accounting for all the kids? Are we doing roll call and stuff like that? So, I mean, there's extra questions, but it's definitely not off the board of things that are acceptable. Playgrounds, I mean, we see that all the time. As long as they aren't, rickety or anything like that. I think most playgrounds these days are, commercial grade and pretty well up to date. We can still consider everything there. I don't see a whole lot of like pools on premises just because of how, the risk is right there, a child wandering off and stuff like that. So there's definitely a lot more questions that are asked around something of that sort. But I wouldn't say it's always, completely off the table right off the bat.
Great, great. With childcare, another question that we often get is professional liability. Is there any sort of limit that we can include in a package? What are some of if so, what are some of the highlights that you can provide for an insured on this sort of risk?
Yeah, so we definitely can offer professional. That just gives them additional coverage for the level of care that the employees are giving to the children, and the different instruction that they're doing, and it just help cover them for if there's any sort of misconstruement of that. So it's very helpful. We pretty much included on I think almost 100% of our daycare submissions, and it's been a great addition to the policy.
Great. And that kind of leads me to my next question as far as extra coverages that may make your product superior to others. Abuse and molestation. That is another question that we get a lot of. If there are options for it, and if so, what sort of limits or considerations would you have? And is there extra paperwork, an additional supplement that would be needed for it, or what's the scoop with abuse and molestation?
Yeah, so yeah, definitely very common requested coverage. We do have a specific additional abuse molestation questionnaire that just sees what controls, are they doing annual background checks on their employees? Has there been ever an instance of, an abuse incident pop up? How do you report if there's been an incident that comes up? So as long as we have just some, stance of, what kind of controls are in place, we can definitely look at, matching those limits. If there's something that might be a little less than favorable, we can still look at coverage, but it might be sublimited. Within our human services program, which the daycares are under, we do have a human services wrap. So we have additional named insured wrap that's in there that's really beneficial. We have a damage to property caused by client coverage in there too. That's also been a great addition that, people like to look for.
It's great. And that kind of answered my next question for you as far as other coverages that we can offer the child care centers. But, those wraps are really nice to have, a set premium for them that is affordable for most and gives the additional coverage that would be relevant for this particular product line. Speaking of that, do you have any questions that would stand out to you regarding transportation? If I talked about field trips earlier, what about employees transporting the kids to the field trip, like the museums? What are some of your thoughts there?
Sure. So we don't like any young drivers. Usually 25 and over is what we look at. We do run MVRs on everybody just to make sure that there's nothing crazy going on there. Autos, usually we don't like to have big buses. Usually kind of your larger passenger vans are a bit more like, usually it's probably 8 to 10. Anything higher than that, something that probably we wouldn't look at covering. But there's definitely, your older vehicles or something too that we have to keep an eye on, as they just weren't quite built the same way until, some more regulations came in the later years that, makes it better for our newer vehicles and stuff like that. But I mean, we run the MVRs, we don't want our employees, our daycare employees, to be dropping off or picking up kids for their parents or anything like that. But definitely it's okay if, they're transporting them to and from a field trip location.
Great. Do you have any questions or requirements regarding work comp? If we've got a child care center with several employees, what sort of things do you like to see with workers'
Sure.
compensation?
For work comp, we like to see at least 2 years of established loss history. And we also like to see a majority of the employees being on full-time versus part-time basis. But that ratio can adjust a little bit, whether we can consider or not.
Great. Lastly, I wanted to ask you, do you have any specific examples of claims that you have come across recently? I know our market has shifted over the last year, and we are in a situation where we may see more claims just because of the nature of things. Do you have any examples that could really stand out that we could share with our agents?
You just see a lot of, children getting injured, they fall off of something. They tend to bite one another, it seems like, or things like that. I tend to fall back to that one, but that's usually kind of more so with the claims we're seeing a lot more business or bodily injury claims that pop up more than anything.
Great. Again, when we're talking to an agent about submissions, there is a circumstance where a lot of times agents need it quickly. They need it back. The client is there needing an answer on a premium, and if they can be accepted. Is there any tips that you can give us to help our agents get their submission up to the top of the stack?
Yeah, as much information as you can have beforehand. If you have a copy of that, state licensing, the inspection, the provider corrections, the accords, all of that just makes it so much easier for us to review the account and make sure that, all our, I's are dotted and T's crossed and stuff like that. So the more information is always the better.
Will you accept if we've got a supplemental from a different carrier, are you okay to look at that, or do you need your supplementals specifically?
Yeah, so we can usually work with another carrier's supplements. There might be some additional questions, just every company has a couple different questions here or there, things that we care about a little bit more than maybe another carrier. So there might be follow-up questions, but definitely we can work with that.
Well, I thank you for your time today, Jamie, and all the information that you've given us on childcare risks regarding SECURA's appetite. I look forward to working with you and our agents to help place these and find a solution. Thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you.